Ex-analyst. Empowering analysts, transforming markets.
Well, thank you, Rachel. We are in Fujairah Energy Markets Forum, and I want to take this opportunity to really explore the world of competencies in energy markets. That's the new passion I'm exploring with my company, Ex-analyst. So why don't you tell a little bit about yourself, and then we dive into that question.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and it's great to do it here on the sidelines of the Energy Markets Forum, just because it brings together people with so many different competencies and experience in the energy sector. What I do is mostly economic and political risk relevant to energy markets, both oil and gas, and I help both short-term and longer-term investors and corporations think about those risks.
And you're based in?
I'm based in New York. And have a background of tracking emerging markets, which helps with fundamental stories, and understanding how capital markets work, which help in thinking about the impacts of currency dynamics. These days, a lot of my practice focuses on how sanctions and export controls and tariffs and all these trade barriers impact the energy markets.
This must be a perfect time for your kind of analysis. I'm a more oil fundamentals analysis, but I think the value of geopolitics is huge analysis. So let me turn and ask the question, how has your journey and the analyst in you has changed over the years, and what part of that journey you have enjoyed the most?
Yeah, great question. So I've always been a political economist, so looking at the intersection of politics and economics and financial markets, I guess, came along the way. What I find is fascinating is the way in which markets are ever evolving and how there is flexibility and new markets always developing. And I think the thing I enjoy most is deep diving into a story in a given country or different company and how they're sort of creating new opportunities and capturing how trade routes and other things are changing. So I enjoy coming back to looking at some of these markets and seeing how they've changed over the last period of time. But my journey really started out focused on emerging economies, on the impact of currency policy. I wasn't initially focused on energy, but very quickly I realized how important energy is to economic development on any sector. So I kind of kept coming back to it. So I worked early on how countries here in the Gulf manage their oil wealth and what that meant for global financial markets. And in order to forecast that, you need to understand oil and gas markets. You need to understand the politics around it. And then, of course, in about 2010, you have the US government starting to expand sanctions on Iran. And so I fell down a rabbit hole of trying to understand how those regulations were going to change the markets. And then since then, the use of those tools has just expanded. But I think what's really interesting now also is the proliferation of new data and the need from satellite imagery, different ways of slicing and dicing data to better understand the kind of things that some governments would like to keep hidden. So I think that helps us do that kind of fundamental analysis that is so core to the work we all do.
So I think what I'm gathering, Rachel, is that you really were from a financial side of the market and then really understood that energy is a big piece, and then you combined the intersection of the energy and the finance is what you really found the most joy with. And now with so much more data, but don't you think that there is one side of the equation is huge amount of data information, but I want to ask the question around what kind of competencies you really focused on in building and something that served you very well in producing high quality analysis.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to build and sort of build models and then continually test them, not assume that historical relationships always hold, but to build fundamental balances, to assess what policy choices might change those, and to see and to have that structure around it. So recently I spent a lot of time on this policy piece, how policy will change the fundamentals. But I think ultimately you've got to sort of understand the numbers. You've got to understand what the realities in the market, really are, and not just what, say, a policymaker says they're going to do.
Because maybe policy is probably the most leading indicator of the action by the private enterprise, and then you have the supply demand economics, and then things will flow into other things. So what you're sharing is the policy side analysis and the impact on the fundamentals.
And I think what's also really important is to ground any of that analysis both in the data-driven work in the energy markets, but also data-driven work on the economic balance sheets of different countries, especially major producers and consumers. And so my background really trying to understand how a country like Saudi Arabia's balance of payments works, how the composition of Chinese growth works, allows one to capture when there might be shifts in their energy demand composition or just evolution. And so I find it's really important to understand well the geography you're working on. Maybe then you layer on other geographies as well, but you can't necessarily jump to the globe if you don't understand.
So more deep dive in one particular geography and really understand the policy, and the policy will be activated through capital, and then the fundamentals is I think that's an interesting way.
Yeah.
So I know in this day and age, AI is there a lot more, and I use it, you use it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can smell something when you don't get a good answer. But I believe the younger generation which is using, and the future analysts, what 2 or 3 things you would tell to them that yes, use AI, but don't lose sight of these important skill sets or competencies they need to definitely build into their toolkit?
Yeah, so I think biggest thing is don't forget that you have critical thinking skills. Analysts at all levels. So, and build those up. Read widely about sort of historical and other dynamics. Play with the data. Maybe have AI help you compile it and correlate it, but question it at every turn. Think about, does this make logical sense? Because sometimes there are data errors, even irrespective of AI. Sometimes a national data source will have a mistake that they might correct. Trust but verify in the sources. And the other is, if you do want to become a generalist, focus in on understanding these different geographies and then sort of build them up. But ultimately, also, don't turn off your brain assuming that AI knows more than you, because often it doesn't. So think about and analyze and ask those questions, and find mentors who can share their experience in the dynamic, and find sources that you respect. Come back to them, question them, don't believe everything you read. And sort of think about how it all comes together. And that's something I not only try to help young analysts with, but also my students at New York University try to look at historical examples and think about whether they ring true today.
So I think if I sum it up, I think what you're saying is that because AI makes the content look so polished, it almost makes us believe that this is right information. And that's where a lot of questioning, you cannot outsource that kind of a questioning to the AI side,
that's
but really
exactly right.
keep that critical thinking.
That's right. And I think sometimes also, if something sounds too good to be true, sometimes it is. And sometimes things shift, and AI is only as good as the sort of the data that's put into it. I mean, I often, when I started out, people would talk about the quality of a model like sort of garbage in, garbage out. We have to be careful in our line of work not to only do the analysis in the areas where we have the data. Sometimes we have to get creative about how we really would measure measure something if it's in an area where maybe the data is scarce. And so I've gravitated towards geographies where both the politics may matter as much as the economics, as much as the market fundamentals. And so that means you have to have other catalysts that you're watching for. But it keeps life really, really interesting. And you meet great people like you who are sort of also working at this intersection.
Well, on that note, thank you, Rachel. And I think there is nuggets in the words and which people need to think about and internalize and reflect upon, and then really it will work for them. So thank you very much for a short chat on this.
Great. Thank you so much.